We're meeting over in that area.
Thank you for joining us at this year's Hashoah Commemoration. Memory is transformative when we actively engage with it. It helps us keep the legacy of the lives we have lost alive in our hearts and in our collective memory. As sundown reaches us here in Sacramento, we will stand with Jews around the world doing just this, remembering, honoring, and making their memories a blessing. Our program offers the opportunity for members of our community who survived the Holocaust to stand together and walk in a procession alongside their descendants. They will light 6 candles, one for each of the 6 million Jewish souls lost during the Holocaust. If you are a first, second, third, or any generation Holocaust survivor and would like to participate, please gather in the North Foyer. Recording the names of family who have perished in the war or survived it and have since passed away is another way to honor and keep their memory alive. We know some of you submitted names after the book was printed. These names will be added to next year's book. Thank you for keeping their memories alive and for being here with us tonight.
by fathers and mothers, the choices made by our keynote speaker tonight, personal, powerful, and enduring. In Musar tradition, which is spiritual practice and ethical development, these moments where we make a choice are called bechira points, from the Hebrew word bachar, to choose. A bechira point is that moment when our free will meets reality and we decide. In times of crisis, it may feel like we have no choice at all. But Judaism insists otherwise. In Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19, we are commanded, Uvacharta b'chayim, choose life. Not passively, not someday, but actively, now. Holocaust survivor and psychologist Viktor Frankl spoke directly to this truth when he said, everything can be taken from a human being but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. Even in darkness, we are never without that final choice. Friends, quite recently we sat around our Seder tables telling the story of the Exodus, the story of courage, of movement toward freedom. And the Haggadah mentions a seemingly not so dramatic passage from the book of Exodus about Moses picking up a long stick from the ground, a shepherd's staff. We find this in Exodus chapter 4, verse 17, where Moses is at a breaking point. He is spiritually depleted, he's overwhelmed, afraid because God has told him to confront the Pharaoh and he believes no one will listen. And so Moses pleads with God, please, oh God, send someone else. And God responds with this simple instruction. Ve'et hamateh tikach biyadcha. Take that staff in your hand, asher ta'aseh bo et ha'otot, with which you will perform the signs. A staff, a mateh, just a piece of wood. But Moses chooses to pick it up with his own hands, maybe with resolve, maybe reluctantly, but he picks it up. The Breslov Haggadah emphasizes that this moment mattered not because of the staff, but because Moses did this seemingly small thing. And that choice shaped our people's narrative. For the word mateh is not only a staff, it also means tribe. Tonight we will hear personal, profound stories about the choices made across generations. And in our lives, we face multiple crises and dangerous situations, all too often feeling helpless without agency. That's when we have to remember who we are. May all of us be inspired to pick up the mateh, to pick up the staff, a symbol of action, resilience, and hope. And may we have the courage to make resolute choices bravely and faithfully, to live and lead a life of blessing for ourselves and generations to come. Ken Yehi Ratzon.
Tonight, we gather not in silence, but in solemn defiance. As the flames of the remembrance rise before us on this Yom Hashoah, they illuminate the truth that burns within our hearts. We will never forget, we cannot forget, and we must not forget. The Holocaust was not merely a tragedy, it was humanity's darkest betrayal. 6 million Jewish lives, grandparents, parents, children, systematically murdered. Not as casualties of war, but targets of a campaign to erase an entire people from existence. Each name we recite today represents an entire universe extinguished, dreams unrealized, futures stolen, and voices silenced. But today we do more than mourn. We testify. In a world increasingly willing to look away from the hard truths, we stand as witness when we say, never again. These are not empty words echoing in the wind. They are a sacred covenant to those that we have lost. The alarming surge of anti-Semitism we see today is not merely concerning, it is an alarm that demands our immediate and unwavering response. The spray-painted swastikas, the intimidation at colleges, the violent attacks on our community, these are not isolated incidences. They are warning signs that history has taught us to recognize. We will not be passive observers to this rising hatred. We will not retreat behind walls of fear. Instead, we will meet this moment with the full force of our collective resolve. We will educate our children about the horrors of the past, not to burden them, but to arm them with the vigilance that the truth demands. We will build coalitions that transcend our differences, recognizing that anti-Semitism is not merely a Jewish problem, it's humanity's problem. From the ashes of Auschwitz, Treblinka, Bergen-Belsen, and Dachau, we have built lives, communities, and a fierce commitment to justice. The survivors and their families, among us, their very existence is a triumph over the evil. They have taught us that even in our darkest hour, the human spirit can and will remain unbroken. The resilience is not just their legacy, it is our inheritance, our responsibility, and our sacred charge. Let these candles we light today illuminate more than our ceremony. Let them ignite our passion for justice, our courage to speak our truth, and our determination to stand against the forces of hatred. Let the names we speak aloud not only echo just in this room, but in the chambers of power, in our classrooms, in our hearts, reminding us that behind each name was a person with hopes and dreams not different than our own. In the face of evil, silence is complicity. In the face of hatred, indifference is acceptance. Today, we choose to remember to act. We choose to transform our grief into purpose, our memory into mission, our pain into power. May the souls of the 6 million be bound in the bond of eternal life. And as we, the living, honor their memory, not just with our tears, but with our unwavering commitment to building a world worthy of their memory. A world where never again is not just a solemn promise, it is our lived reality.
Good evening. On an evening like tonight, it is good to be in community with you. In a time like we're living in now, it is good to be here in community with you. I read an article recently in the Times of Israel saying that recent studies and excavations had shown how the differences between ancient Jews and ancient Christians in how they did their worship were shown in the buildings that they worshipped. Christians, there were, in the 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th centuries, there was evidence of a lot of home-based shrines and churches. For the Jews, it was neighborhood, village, city-based synagogues. We moved from the temple into community synagogues, and that is because we need each other at times like these. That persisted throughout our history. The Jews who were forced out of their villages, who were forced out of their apartment buildings into ghettos, they came together in community to support each other. The Jews who were then taken to the concentration camps, the work camps, the death camps. There are records of how they tried to keep community, keep holidays, keep to support each other, share food. And we do that today. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize the dignitaries and public leaders who are among us today. We are expecting Sacramento City Council member Roger Dickinson. I'm not sure if he's made it in yet. Rachel Our community's cantors, Ben Harris, Alex Curlin, Noah Rachels, and our community rabbis, Ben Herman, Nancy Wexler, Alan Rabashaw, David Azen, Denny Marshall. If I missed any of you, I apologize. Thank you.
I invite you to rise as you're able. El malei rachamim shochein bamromim hamtzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מסירים את נשמות 6 מיליון אחינו ואחיותינו שנהרגו על קידוש השם בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ביצרור החיים את נשמתם אדוני ונחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבם ונאמר Amen. May be seated.
Erev Tov, good evening. I'm honored to be introducing our speaker tonight. Dr. John Marshall Hessel is a retired physician who lives in Granite Bay with his wife of 60 years, Ellie Hessel. He's a member of Temple Or Rishon, has 2 children and 5 grandchildren. John was born in Prague, Czechoslovakia, in May of 1938. Through a sequence of events, which John will talk about today in his Holocaust story, his parents were able to bring him to safety in the USA. He went on to complete college at Carleton College in Minnesota, medical school at the University of Chicago, and a surgical residency at Stanford, serving 2 years as a naval medical officer during the Vietnam War, and then 30 years in a private practice in the Bay Area. Now retired, John enjoys spending time with his family and his friends and pursuing his hobbies, fly fishing, canoeing, and cross-country skiing. John Hessel.
Thank you very much, Karen, for that kind introduction. You covered a lot of things I was going to say, but I'm still going to say them. Also want to thank the Federation, particularly Diane Weber, for inviting me here and supporting me in this process. I also need to thank some other folks. I need to thank my brother, Dr. Stephen Hessel, for his support and for providing some of the documents that you're going to see and some of the pictures. Also want to thank my children and grandchildren, David, Amy, Ethan, Reed, Lily, Aiden, and Marco, who encouraged me to tell this story and who are interested in knowing about it. Also, because of their tech savvy, they allowed me to produce my first ever PowerPoint. I hope there are no glitches. We'll see. Also want to thank my wonderful wife, Ellie, who, as you just heard, has been with me for over 60 years, almost 61 years now, for her support. I'm humbled by the millions of Holocaust stories that are out there, told and untold. And I'm very honored to tell my story publicly for the first time. I'm going to tell you a few things more about myself before I plunge in here to my story. I'm the product of a culturally mixed marriage, Jewish on my mother's side and Gentile on my father's. I was not raised in any religion, never attended any religious school, never went to church, never went to a synagogue until I met my wife. I consider myself to be Jewish by tradition on my mother's side and by choice on my wife's side. This story involves both the Jewish and Gentile sides of my family, and those are the forces that make me who I am today. Forgive me if I hesitate or stumble a little bit. I'm an old guy, and this has been a very emotional experience for me. Still is. Let's see if I can get the PowerPoint going here. This is a picture of my maternal grandparents, Robert and Rita Eisler, when they were around 50 years of age before they were lost to me forever. They were born in Prague, Bohemia at the time. They were born in the late 1800s, and they married in the early 1900s. In approximately 1910, they decided to immigrate from Czechoslovakia to Chicago, where my grandmother Rita had 4 siblings. Her maiden name was Glazer, and she had 4 Glazer siblings who had immigrated earlier to Chicago and were established, living successful lives on the near north side of Chicago. This is a copy of my mother's birth certificate. She was born shortly after they moved to Chicago. This is a very critical document in my story. My mother was born on April 27th, 1912. And I don't know if you can make it out, but that's her birth certificate. And at the bottom, you can see it was signed by a man named Richard J. Daley. Some of you older guys may recognize that name. He later became the somewhat famous, infamous mayor of Chicago. Shortly after my mother's birth, though, Robert and Rita got very bad news from Prague. Robert's sister, who had been caring for her elderly parents and his elderly parents, died tragically in a fire. And Robert and Rita decided they needed to return to Prague. So they did that shortly after my mother was born. They established their small family in a suburb of Prague called Rodnice, and Robert there was the owner of a button manufacturing company, Butonia, which Rita assisted in managing. Butonia was at that time a conglomerate of companies, and this was one in Prague of a few that were scattered around Europe. They were a secular Jewish family. They considered themselves Czechs first, Jews second. That was a somewhat common phrase that was used then. My mother, Lillian, was partly raised by a Czech nanny, and she attended public schools. Public schools at that time mandated religious education of choice for a half day per week. So Lillian attended Hebrew school every week. While she was in high school, before I get to that, a couple of pictures of Butonia. This is a picture from 1924 of the staff of Butonia. That my grandfather is seated there in the middle of the picture with all the employees and other people that work there. This is another picture from around that time. That's my grandfather standing there in the office of Butonia, kind of overlooking the clerical workers there. While she was in high school, my mother, Lillian, met Ernest Hessel, my future father. They were both very good students, and they shared a lot of interests, including hiking, skiing, canoeing, things that they passed on to me. They had a lot of mutual friends and companions. Eventually, they fell in love. They were married in a civil ceremony in Prague in 1936. This is their wedding picture and their marriage certificate. By that time, Ernest had completed medical school and a surgical residency, and he had begun his medical practice in Prague. Lillian was an engineering graduate student, but she dropped out to start a family, and that was me. This is my birth certificate. I was born May 29, 1938. This was not a good time to be born to a Jewish mother in Czechoslovakia. As you can see from this map, various treaties had begun to shrink the country's autonomy, the worst of which was the Munich Agreement of September 1938, where England, France, Italy gave Nazi Germany part of Czechoslovakia in exchange for a promise of peace from Hitler. Instead of peace, this only encouraged Hitler and his Nazi government to advance further into Eastern Europe. This should say March 15th, 1939, little typo there, but In March of 1939, Germany invaded what remained of Czechoslovakia, including Prague. This picture shows the German army at the gates of Prague, at the gates of the castle where the government was located. Around this time, shortly before and during this time, we were living, my parents and my grandparents and I, pretty normal life. This shows my dad holding me on his shoulders. Here's my grandmother, Rita, with a nice smile on her face, and me. There's my mom and me at that time. This is the only picture I have of my grandfather, unfortunately, with me, together. It's from a film clip, which I had hoped to show you, but it didn't work out. But you can see the smile on his face, and any of you who are grandparents know that feeling when you hold your first grandchild. I certainly do. My mother greatly admired my grandfather. She had wonderful things to say about him all her life. Unfortunately, at that time, things started to get rough for Jews, particularly in Prague. Not only Jews, but others. My father, who was sort of a peripheral member of the Communist Party, which was a big party at that time in Czechoslovakia, a couple of his friends who were active in the Communist Party were arrested and put in jail. And he knew that he wanted to get out. He wanted to get us out. He convinced Lillian, my mom, that we should move to Chicago, where she had two aunts. Well, Lillian had two aunts and two uncles. She was very reluctant to move. She didn't want to leave her parents. Her parents didn't want to move. They thought that, at least early on, they thought the Germans would come to their senses and oust Hitler, which of course never happened. But Ernest networked his medical colleagues, and he found a physician in Chicago who was willing to give him the necessary sponsorship to get a visa to the United States. My mother was able to go to the U.S. consulate in Prague. The United States was still neutral. They had a consulate in Prague, and with her Chicago, Cook County birth certificate, she had no trouble getting an American passport, which you see here, and that is because of birthright citizenship. And I need to say that emphatically. So she had a passport for herself and me. I wouldn't be here talking to you today if it wasn't for birthright citizenship. My father, on the other hand, being a Czech citizen, would not be able to get a passport, obviously. My mother, although she had a passport, she still had to get an exit visa from the German government, the German occupiers of Prague, which meant that she had to go to the office of this handsome gentleman, a man by the name of Heinrich Reinhardt. he was assigned by Hitler to be the protector of Bohemia. They didn't call it Czechoslovakia, they called it Bohemia because they wanted to go back to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Because of US neutrality, Heydrich was required to sign and stamp an exit visa for her, but she had to go to his office to get it. And here's what she told me. She was very afraid to go there. When she got in, he looked at her and said, "Your Aryan husband must be very unhappy that he married a Jewish cow like you." He signed the paper and threw it on the floor in front of her, made her pick it up. With great relief, she said back to him, "Ours is a happy marriage," and she hustled out of his office. There was no way my father was going to be able to get an exit visa from this guy. He had to find another way. Reinhard Heydrich ended up assassinated. This is his car after it was bombed in Prague later in the war. Czech patriots killed him, but the Nazis extracted revenge by mass killings in the villages of Lidice and Lizaki, where hundreds of people were murdered. But Hitler had made a mistake as far as my father was concerned. He was an officer in the Czech army, and he was called to duty because of the Nazi invasion. The Czech government outgunned and outmanned surrendered very quickly to the invading Nazi army, and the Czech government went into exile in London. Ernest, my dad, prevailed on a sympathetic officer, commanding officer, to send him on a bogus errand. He gave him orders to travel to Yugoslavia to take care of an ailing officer there. These are the documents that my dad used. The one on the left, on the right there, is the one he used to get into Yugoslavia, which was still neutral, and then later from Yugoslavia to Italy. My mom and I, with our U.S. passport, traveled by train. Thank you. That was a good idea. I don't know where that came from, but anyway, this is just a diagram showing the travels of my mom and I from Prague to Genoa, crossing Austria and Italy by train. My mom said she was pretty scared at those borders, but with the American passport, she really didn't have any trouble getting across. My dad, well, we're missing one picture here, unfortunately, but let's see, get this to go back. Okay. Okay, there's a few glitches here, but I'm sorry about that. But I can tell you what happened. Ernest was able to get to Belgrade, Yugoslavia, and he went to the U.S. consulate in Belgrade, and he obtained a visa to the United States. And then he traveled to Genoa, hitchhiking, partly on foot, partly on buses, but he made it there. And on October 6, 1939, we took this ship, the Rex, from Genoa to New York. The relatives in Chicago wired enough money to allow us to get tickets on this ship. The ship was making its last transatlantic voyage. It later became a troop ship for the Italian army, and it was submarined by the British Navy late in the war and sunk. But anyway, we were able to get on that ship, and it made its way to New York, and from New York we went on to Chicago. And here I am in 1940 with some of my cousins, some of my Glazer cousins. Here I am with my favorite cousin, Bunny Glazer, who unfortunately died a few years ago, but she was my babysitter and my caretaker, and I just loved her all her life. She was a wonderful person. Here we are on North Beach in Chicago. She's feeding me ice cream, I think. So we had the warm and caring love of relatives when we got to Chicago, and I'll never forget those early days of my life, which were wonderful. After a year or so, we moved from the north side of Chicago to the western suburbs of Chicago, actually Berwyn, Illinois, where my father began his long and successful medical and surgical practice. Life was really good to us in the United States, but the news that we were getting from Prague was awful. It's horrible. Robert and Rita were able to send letters for quite a while. They tried to put up kind of a brave face in their letters, but things were getting really bad for Jews in Prague in terms of education opportunities, employment opportunities, and later much worse. The letters stopped coming from Prague in 1943, and by 1945, Lillian had learned from Gentile friends in Prague that her parents were definitely gone. Her grief and sense of survivor guilt was tremendous. It was overwhelming. And in a misguided attempt to help her through this, my father burned the letters that she had been saving from her parents. I can sort of understand that, he wanted to move on, but it was not a good thing to do. Her grief morphed into a long-lasting depression, and it affected everybody in our family. In spite of the stigma and denial for people with depression at that time, Lillian fought on bravely, and she became a loving and caring mother, grandmother, great-grandmother. My father, Ernest, although he was a loving and caring and generous father, eventually turned out to be an unfaithful husband. And when I was around 30 years old, my parents divorced. Lillian's depression, with the help of therapy, improved, and she remained relatively happy and very successful for the rest of her long life. In the early 1990s, Ellie and I visited Amsterdam in the Netherlands and met up with the only maternal relative from Czechoslovakia that survived the Holocaust, my cousin Harry Saltz, who's sitting here next to his wife, Margit. Margit was a kinder transport child from Prague to England, and her parents were lost during the Holocaust. However, she returned to Prague after the war and met Harry, and they were married and had a long and successful marriage. They still have 2 wonderful sons that live in the Netherlands. They're truly heroes of mine. From Amsterdam, Ellie and I went on to Prague and visited the Jewish quarter. There's a picture of the Pinkas Synagogue. Many of you may have been there. Here is a picture of the Prague Cemetery, the mythic home of the Golem and Rabbi Loeb. You can see the tombstones there at the bottom, and the building on the right is the Burial Society building, and that's where Jews were forced by the Nazis to keep meticulous records of the comings and goings, mainly the transports of Jews at the time. We were able to get records of the transport records of my grandparents. And this one is my grandmother Rita's transport record. Her birth date is not correct, but she was transported to Trazian in January of 1942, and from Trazian she was transported to Auschwitz-Birkenau in June of 1942. This is the transport document of my grandfather, Robert, that smiling grandfather. He is listed as missing. He didn't show up for transport. It's the fog of war. We could never find out exactly what happened to him. I can only guess. Sometimes I fantasize that he joined the Czech resistance and fought and died trying to protect others. But I don't think this sweet and gentle person would have done that. I think it's more likely that he took his own life, but I'll never know for sure what happened to him. Here you see a section of the memorial wall that's near the Pinkas Synagogue there in Prague. And circled there in yellow, probably can't make it out because of the size, but there is the listing of my 2 grandparents, surrounded by the thousands of Czech Jews who perished in the Holocaust. So I dedicate this story to the memory of my beloved parents, grandparents, Robert and Rita Eisler. Thank you.
We stand for Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Yalmad yivrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayei t'chol beit Yisrael. V'adalah v'zman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'amei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei v'kusha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushvachata v'nechamata. Da'miran v'alma v'yimru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'akol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom v'ramav. Uyaseh shalom. Aleinu v'akol Yisrael v'yimru amen.
Erev Tov, good evening. It is a profound honor to stand here with you tonight as we remember and honor the 6 million lives lost in the Shoah. Just last week, we gathered around our Passover table to perform one of the most powerful mitzvot in our tradition, Veigareta levincha. You should tell your child. What do we tell them? How do we tell them? And what must we tell them? We tell them our story, our shared history. We tell it with love because it is ours, because each story we carry represents a life, a person, a people. We tell it to create connection, to weave emotional understanding into historical facts, to help shape identity and inspire resilience. We tell it because that is the Jewish way. I am deeply grateful to Dr. John Hessel for sharing his story, your story, Doctor, with us tonight, for showing us how his grandparents and his parents' choices shaped not only his life, but the legacy he's now passing on to his children. Your commitment to memory, Veigareta levincha, is what keeps our collective flame alive. Thank you.
it's now concluded, and there's some refreshments in the back, and you can visit with everybody and Dr. Hessel. Thank you all for attending.